We are starting today's deep dive by asking a fundamental question. Why aren't we built like a wobbly stack of blocks?
Yeah, right.
The answer lies in the incredible anatomical specialization of the pelvic girdle and, well, the entire lower
It
limb.
really does.
We are taking a top-to-bottom exploration of the structures that make us upright, mobile, and stable.
That is the core theme.
Yeah.
Our source material, Chapter 76 from Gray's Anatomy, it really sets the stage by emphasizing that the lower limb is fundamentally specialized for three non-negotiable functions.
Okay, what they?
Supporting your body weight, locomotion walking, and critically, maintaining stability and balance.
Yeah.
This focus on support is what completely differentiates it from the upper limb.
Right, which is all about grasping and manipulation.
Exactly.
So our mission is ambitious. Since you can't look at diagrams right now, we're going to give you a visualization guide. We're going to mentally map out all the critical components from the strongest bones to the deepest, most vulnerable nerves.
And connect it all to the function.
And connect it to the function so you get those clinical aha moments. We'll be connecting where structures pass through, what holds them in place, and where they are most likely to get damaged.
Let's start this journey right at the anchor point. The bones and joints responsible for transmitting the entire body's load.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Functionally, everything starts with the skeleton's sheer strength. The bones of the lower limb, the ilium, ischium, femur, tibia, they are just massively robust.
They're weight-bearing.
Exactly. They have these strong external cortical structures and then internal trabecular patterns that are perfectly adapted for absorbing and distributing force.
And when we look at the joints, we see this recurring theme. It's all about stability over mobility, right?
That's the trade-off, yes. If you look at the pelvic girdle, specifically the sacroiliac joints, they've made a huge functional sacrifice.
How so?
They've given up mobility almost entirely for immense strength. They link the bones with both fibrous tissue and a small synovial joint space. They're built purely for rigid weight transmission.
So the complete opposite of the shoulder.
The functional antithesis. Then anteriorly, you have the pubic symphysis, which is a cartilaginous joint. It allows only a tiny bit of mobility.
Which is vital during childbirth, of course.
Exactly. It's a key adaptation.
But then you move just one joint down to the hip, and it seems to strike a perfect balance.
It does. The hip joint is a synovial ball and socket. It's incredibly stable, but it still offers movement in all three planes. Planes flexion, extension, abduction, rotation.
But as you go further down the leg,
The trade-off shifts again. Joints like the knee and ankle, they gain more and more mobility, which often makes them structurally, less inherently stable.
that's why we see so many ankle sprains. It's a huge load-bearing joint, but it allows for what, about 70 degrees of motion?
Around 70 degrees of dorsiflexion and plantar flexion, yes. It gains that motion, but it loses some of that deep, bony resilience.
Okay, so the structure is solid, but everything needs its infrastructure. Nerves, vessels. How do they get through this dense area?
That brings us to the key anatomical gateways. These are protected routes.
Let's try to visualize these passages because there were a lot of clinical problems start.
For sure. First up is the inguinal region. You can think of this as the main highway into the anterior thigh. It includes the myopectoneal orifice and the inguinal canal.
And what's passing through there?
All the big players. Psoas major and iliacus muscles, the femoral artery, vein, nerves, and all the lymphatics.
Okay, and deeper.
You have the much narrower obturator canal. That's the small passage for the obturator nerve and its vessels to get into the medial thigh.
And then the big exit ramp out the back.
The gluteal region. It uses two major holes or foramina. The greater sciatic foramen is the main one. It's the exit for the sciatic nerve, the gluteal nerves and vessels, and the pudendal nerve.
And the lesser sciatic foramen.
It's smaller, located just below it. It's mainly for the obturator internus tendon to pass through, and it allows the pudendal nerve to loop back around into the perineum.
Okay, moving on from the skeleton and these gateways, let's talk about the soft tissue, the wrapping. I know the skin is thicker, especially on the sole of the foot and the buttocks.
Right, wheat-bearing surfaces. But the real structural star here is the deep fascia.
The fascia lata in the thigh.
Yes, and it's best to visualize it as a tough, inelastic, circumferential stocking, a compression stocking.
And this wrapping is important for a few reasons.
Multiple reasons. It constrains the muscles, it directs the spread of, say, pus or blood, and it even determines how broken bone fragments will move.
Wait a second. So you're saying this natural compression garment is actually more critical for getting blood back to our heart than the valves inside our veins?
Functionally, yes, especially when we're upright. Because we're always fighting gravity, this tight wrapping is essential for the muscle pump. When your muscles contract inside that tight fascia,
It squeezes the deep
it
veins.
squeezes them and forces the blood back toward the heart. It's a huge help.
That's fascinating. So it's a circulatory necessity. But it also sounds like a major clinical risk if something goes wrong inside that tight space.
What's fascinating here is the clinical importance of this tight wrapping. That's the downside. Because the deep fascia is so inelastic, it divides the muscles into these rigid osteofascial compartments.
So if you have trauma, like a major fracture, and you get bleeding or swelling inside one of those tight compartments.
The pressure just skyrockets.
hmm
The inelastic fascia leads directly to acute compartment syndrome.
And that pressure can cut off blood flow.
It compresses the arteries and veins, leading to ischemic damage to nerves and muscles. It's a surgical emergency. You need a fasciotomy, a cut through the fascia, to relieve that pressure and save the limb.
Let's talk about the engines now. The muscles, they seem to work differently than in the arm. It's more about stabilization.
That's exactly right. In the upper limb, the shoulder is usually fixed and the hand moves. In the lower limb, the foot is often fixed on the ground, and the muscles have to stabilize the entire body weight above them.
The classic example is gluteus medius, right? We learn it as a hip abductor, but that's not its main job.
Not its main job during gait, no. Its primary action is as a pelvic stabilizer. When you take a step, it contracts intensely on the standing leg to keep your pelvis level.
So your hip doesn't drop on the side that's swinging through.
Precisely. It prevents that drop.
Let's quickly map out the other major groups.
Sure. In the iliac region, you have iliopsoas, the main hip flexors. In the gluteal region, gluteus maximus is that powerful hip extensor, think, standing up from a chair. And medius and minimus are those key stabilizers.
Okay, then the thigh compartments. Anterior is pretty straightforward.
Anterior is your quadriceps femoris, powerful knee extensors. Medial is the adductor group.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The adductor magnus is more complex than it looks.
It's a huge muscle, and it's unique. It has a dual function and, crucially, a dual innervation. The front part is an adductor, as you'd expect. But the posterior part, the hamstring-like portion, is actually innervated by the sciatic nerve and acts as a hip extensor. So it kind of blurs the line between the medial and posterior compartments.
And the posterior compartment is the hamstrings?
The hamstrings, yes, your primary knee flexors. Then down in the leg, it's all about moving the foot.
So you have the anterior leg compartment for lifting the foot, dorsiflexion.
Tibialis anterior. The lateral compartment has the fibularis muscles for averting the foot. And the big, powerful posterior compartment has your plantar flexors, gastrocnemius, and soleus for pushing off when you walk.
Now, to fuel all these powerful muscles, you need a major highway for blood, and that's the femoral artery.
It's the principal supply. It's a direct continuation of the external iliac. If you visualize its journey, it courses down the thigh in the adductor canal, then passes through a gap in the adductor magnus.
The adductor hiatus.
The adductor hiatus.
Yeah.
And as soon as it goes through that hole, it enters the posterior thigh and becomes the popliteal artery.
And this journey gives us some great clinical checkpoints for assessing blood flow. Let's quickly hit the 4 key pulse points for checking for, say, peripheral artery disease.
Absolutely vital. First, the femoral artery pulse. You can feel it easily right as it enters the femoral triangle.
Then the popliteal artery pulse behind the knee.
That one's tough. It's deep. You need to have the knees slightly flexed to feel it.
And down at the ankle.
The posterior tibial artery pulse is palpable just behind the medial malleolus, that inner ankle bone.
And finally on top of the foot.
The dorsalis pedis pulse, right over the tarsal bones, just lateral to the big toe extensor tendon. If those pedal pulses are weak or absent, that's a huge red flag for poor circulation.
Okay, shifting to venous return, this is where that fascial stocking concept comes back in, right?
It all connects. You have superficial veins, the saphenous veins, and deep veins. Getting blood back up requires that active muscle pump constrained by the deep fascia.
And when the system fails, you get varicose veins.
Yes. That's usually because the valves and the perforating veins become incompetent. These are the veins that connect the superficial system to the deep one.
So it's a high-pressure leak.
It's a high-pressure leak. During muscle contraction, blood is forced the wrong way, back into the superficial veins, causing them to stretch out and become varicose.
And for lymphatics, it's pretty simple. Everything generally drains up towards the inguinal nodes.
Correct. following the paths of the saphenous veins up to the inguinal group of nodes.
Now, the control system, the innervation, this is where it gets complex, with two major nerve networks.
The lumbar plexus, L1 to L4, and the sacral plexus, L4 to S3. They supply the entire limb.
Let's walk through the major nerves and where they're most vulnerable, starting with the front of the thigh.
The femoral nerve from L2 to L4 supplies the anterior compartment, including the quads. It's vulnerable to compression right under the inguinal ligament.
And an injury there would knock out your quads.
Knock out your quads, your hip flexors, and you'd lose your patellar reflex.
Then the obturator nerve for the medial side?
Correct. L2 to L4 again. Injury paralyzes the adductors.
But the giant of the group is the sciatic nerve.
L4 to S3, the body's thickest nerve. It emerges through the greater sciatic foramen and is highly vulnerable to compression. That's the basis for sciatica.
And it's also famous for being at risk from, well, poorly placed injections in the buttock. If you have to give one, what is the one thing you need to remember to stay safe?
This is an essential clinical point. The classic dorsogluteal approach is now largely avoided because of this risk. The recommended safe zone is the ventrogluteal approach. You have to find your landmarks between the iliac spine and the greater trochanter. It keeps you well away from the nerve's path.
Okay, and as we go down the leg, the sciatic nerve splits.
It does. The tibial nerve goes down the back and can get trapped at the ankle, causing tarsal tunnel syndrome. But the most notoriously vulnerable nerve in the whole limb is the other branch.
The common fibular, or peroneal nerve.
Exactly, the common fibular nerve.
Why is it so exposed?
Because it curves superficially right around the neck of the fibula. It's right up against the bone. So trauma, a tight cast, even just crossing your legs for too long, can compress it.
And an injury there is devastating. It causes the classic foot drop.
Total inability to lift the foot. Correct.
Sure.
Loss of dorsiflexion.
One last nerve vulnerability.
The lateral femoral cutaneous nerve. It's purely sensory, but it can get entrapped under the inguinal ligament, causing neuralgia paresthetica. Just painful numbness on the outer thigh.
And finally, an injury to the superior gluteal nerve, the one that supplies those key stabilizers.
It leads to a very clear clinical sign. Paralysis of gluteus medius minimus causes Trendelenburg sign.
Where the pelvis drops on the unsupported side when you walk.
The hip just sags dramatically. And functionally, remember, we rely on key reflexes. The knee reflex, L2 to L4, and the ankle reflex, S1 and S2, to test these pathways.
Our entire discussion really culminates in understanding how we walk, the gait cycle.
Which is defined as the time from one heel hitting the ground to that same heel hitting the ground again.
And it's split into two main phases. The stance phase, when your foot is on the ground.
Which is about 60% of the cycle.
And the swing phase, when the foot is in the air, which is the other 40%. And there are these short periods where both feet are on the ground.
Exactly, double limb support. But the amazing part is the muscle kinematics.
Yeah.
Let's take heel contact. The second your heel hits the ground, the knee has to bend slightly to absorb shock.
And that's controlled by the quadriceps.
Controlled by an eccentric contraction of the quads. The muscle is lengthening while under tension to act as a brake.
So that deep muscle soreness you feel after walking down a steep hill, that's the feeling of your quads working eccentrically to absorb all that impact.
That is the perfect analogy. And at the same time, your gluteus medius and minimus are contracting eccentrically on that standing leg to stop the other side of your pelvis from dropping.
It's all about controlled braking.
So much of it is.
Yeah.
Then as your foot comes down, the dorsiflexors, like tibialis anterior, contract eccentrically to lower the foot gently to the ground so it doesn't just slap down.
And the push-off.
That's where you finally get a powerful concentric contraction from the plantar flexors, the gastrocnemius and soleus, to propel you forward.
It's amazing how quickly we learn this. Adult gait patterns are set by, what, 4 or 5 years old?
Around then, yes. And sadly, the pattern deteriorates with age. After 70, speed declines, step length gets shorter, and people spend more time in that double limb support phase.
An adaptation for stability.
It's all about prioritizing stability over efficiency.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, knowing these surface landmarks is vital for safe clinical practice.
Absolutely. The most famous one is probably the supracristal plane, or Tuffier's line, the line between the top of your iliac crests.
And that usually crosses the L4, L5 disc space.
Making it the landmark for doing a lumbar puncture safely, below where the spinal cord ends.
And for surgery, we have to be so careful. We mentioned the sciatic nerve.
And around the ankle, incisions put the sural nerve and superficial fibular nerve at huge risk. They are notorious for forming painful neuromas if they get damaged.
So, in summary, We covered how the lower limb is a highly complex stability machine. It's protected by these tight fascial compartments, powered by muscles often acting as stabilizers.
And served by a neurovascular network that dictates the clinical picture of major diseases like PAD and compartment syndrome.
The core takeaway for me is the functional integration. The fact that a simple movement in walking relies on such precise, coordinated timing from muscles innervated by so many different spinal levels.
L1 all the way down to S3. It's truly remarkable.
So what does this all mean for you, the learner? Consider the complexity of that segmental innervation. L1 through S3 supply almost all lower limb movement.
Mhm.
If a seemingly simple act like ankle plantar flexion, which is mostly S1 and S2, suddenly fails, how widely do you have to investigate along that entire neural axis to find the problem, given the vast overlap of dermatomes and muscle supply?
It forces you to think axially, not just locally. It demands an understanding of the whole system, not just the individual parts.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the anatomical basis of the pelvic girdle and lower limb. On behalf of our whole team, we hope this mental map helps your studies,
Study hard.
and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.